All right. Genesis chapter 4. All right, we're going to pick up with verse 8. We got down to the point on Wednesday of Cain's unacceptable sacrifice. And of course, God confronted Cain and just asked him, well, instead of messing up, if you do well, we could maybe say if you do better, would be easier, even an equivalent way of saying it, that, you can master this sin that's trying to get you. God warned Cain that he had become a slave to sin, and it was getting the better of him. Well, now that picks us up with verse 8. It says, and Cain told Abel his brother. Now, we don't know just what details Cain told Abel. We don't know whether he said that, well, this is the conversation I had with God, or whether he just told him that God spoke to him. The Bible doesn't give us the details of the conversation. It just says he told Abel his brother. And it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Now, you have to wonder if Cain told Abel, well, God had a conversation with me. Let's go out to the field and I'll tell you about it. And we can only speculate as to what kind of story Cain might have told him to get him to go out, or if they went out to the field just coincidentally because they always went out to the field together.
I got a note here.
All right.
It says Samaritan, Pentateuch, Septuagint, Syriac, and Vulgate add, let us go out to the field. And it's an asterisk from that Abel.
Mine has that same note, Larry.
Right. Basically, there are some of the Old Testament manuscripts that have that additional note in there. But even then, if he invited him out, we don't know under what pretense or excuse he got him to go out there with. But
so was he planning to kill him and lured him out there, or was this just a crime of passion that he was so angry and he directed all that anger at his brother because his brother was the good example and he was the bad example, so he was jealous?
Most commentators will agree that Cain premeditated this, that he snookered his brother to go out with the intention of doing this. Now, again, based on the way the passage reads, whether you include that statement or not, you can't prove that, but that's certainly the direction it seems to be pointing. Now, what I find interesting is up until this point, nobody has ever been killed before. How did Cain know how to go about killing Abel?
Devil.
You think
Evil
it was
devil.
Yeah.
maybe unintentional? Maybe he just struck him out of rage and oops.
I don't know that if it was unintentional or not. I think Cain definitely wanted to do some harm to him. But I go ahead.
It seems a little out of place. It seems misdirected to me. His anger should be at God, who was displeased with him. God was the one who chastised him. Abel didn't do anything to him. So for him to direct his anger at God onto Abel, just
jealousy.
Yeah, but it's jealousy and envy that God likes Abel and he don't like me.
What's Cain going to do to God?
Exactly.
Well, exactly. You can't strike back at God. So this is somebody I can strike back at.
Yeah.
And maybe that's how the thought process started working in his mind.
My point, I think where I'm going with this though, as far as killing him, yeah, it's true that maybe Cain just wanted to hurt him and didn't know this would kill him. But I have a feeling that when sin entered the human race, somehow, and this goes with the idea of knowing good and evil, there was an instinctive understanding from the sinful perspective. Even though a murder had never been committed at this point, Cain knew what to do.
Now they've become like us.
Mm-hmm.
Cain striking Abel was like getting back at God also.
Mm-hmm.
And Cain was the first person ever born with a sin nature.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at this point, had either of these boys had to kill animals?
Well, that's what I
Oh,
was
yeah.
wondering, if they had sacrificed and understood the concept of
That's where the
killing
Uh-huh.
Death.
through that activity.
Oh yeah, God had showed them how to commit conduct a sacrifice.
So they knew how. He knew how to do
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
But it's just the fact that he probably hits him in the head or something, and
Abel brought forth the firstborn of this flock and of the
Yep.
fat. You don't get the fat without skinning the beast.
that's it. All right, verse 9 though. And notice how this parallels God's interaction with Adam in the Garden of Eden. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" First off, notice in the Garden of Eden, Adam never said, why did you do this, or you messed up. The first thing God asked Adam is, Adam, where are you? Notice here, where's Abel? Direct parallel. And God knows where Abel is. So he asked Cain, where's Abel? And of course, Cain's response is, he said, I do not know. So, and then what is that? It's a lie.
Sarcasm.
No, I think it's an outright lie. Am I my brother's keeper?
There's
That's
the
sarcasm.
sarcasm. Yeah.
That's what I'm.
That's the, yeah,
Yeah.
you know.
I know.
Well, of course, the natural conclusion here is, yeah, you are your brother's keeper. You are supposed to take care of one another. But Cain asked this in a question that naturally elicits no, you're not your responsibility, not your day, but maybe we are. Now here's an interesting one for us to stop and think about. Now I'm not going to go through all the details of this again, because that in itself is a long explanation that we'll have to look at later on down the line. But as you'll recall, what we have looked before as to the biblical definition of Hades, not hell, Hades. Or the Old Testament refers to this as Sheol, the place of the dead. Now, as you'll recall, and again, I'm just going to summarize this, Sheol, or Hades, was a two-tiered, location. You had the place of punishment, which is hell, on one side, and you had what Jesus described as paradise, or Abraham's bosom, on the other side. And you'll recall from Jesus' story of Lazarus and the rich man, Abraham himself said, there's this big gulf between us. In fact, a lot of theologians have, theorized that big gulf is the abyss. That if you fell into the abyss, you were gone. That only God himself could retrieve you from that. And that there was this separation. They could see, could talk, speak with each other. There was some communication, but you had a place of punishment over here and a place of comfort over here. Now, back to this. At this point in history, has it ever occurred to you that Abel is the only occupant of paradise at this
First person
point?
to ever die.
Yep. You have to wonder, did God send an angel, or did God himself go and keep Abel company? Because you figure the lifespan of the average human being was hundreds of years at this point, and we don't have a record of anybody else being killed for some time after this. Abel would have been one lonely individual. It would have been, paradise. Even if it would have been a place of comfort, paradise could not have described that to Abel being there all by himself for who knows how long. So you have to wonder. Now again, this is one of those things, the Bible does not say this. So don't go and say that, well, this is what happened. I'm posing the question. You have to wonder, did God himself keep Abel company?
What about all the angels?
Yes, but the angels that were sent there were all sent there for punishment. They would have been in fact,
To paradise?
Bibles, no. Why would they have been in paradise?
Well, you say to keep him company.
And that's what I'm saying. That's the question I'm asking. Did God send an angel to keep him company, or maybe God himself keep him company?
Isn't God's presence there in paradise? To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord.
Wait, keep on. Don't take that one out of context. When did Paul state that?
I don't know.
After,
I'm ignorant.
after the resurrection. To be present from the body is to be, or be absent from the body to be present with the Lord. Paul was talking about after the resurrection of Christ. That's applicable to us today. At this point in history, has the sacrifice for God, for humanity's sins been accomplished?
No.
No. So the gates of heaven are not yet open at this point. That's why so many Old Testament saints didn't want to die, because they knew that at that point they did not go to heaven. They went to the place of comfort, the place of paradise, but their understanding of that was very limited. You remember that concept of progressive revelation, where if you begin with Genesis and work your way through, God reveals himself and the theology about himself and what have you, a little at a time. We have the advantage of being on the tail end of all that, where we've got all of God's word that tells us about this. What did Abel have at that point? Nothing, except the written, or not the written, the oral word of God himself passed down from Adam and Eve, or what maybe he had communicated with God directly, which would have been very limited. All this theology about, paradise and Hades, Abel wouldn't have had a clue about any of that. As far as the angels, we know that the angels who were condemned, which we'll discuss in chapter 6, they would have been on the other side, or if not in the abyss itself. Definitely would not have been there to keep Abel company. So at this point, you just have to ask, did God keep Abel company, or at least send an angel to walk with him during that time? And the reason I think God would have is because why did God create us to begin with?
Fellowship.
There you go, exactly. It would have been a curse in itself to spend all that time in the afterlife completely alone. If anything, that is the definition of what?
Hell.
The second death. Abel would have, even if maybe on the side of paradise, he would have been experiencing the second death to be there by himself.
The abyss, is that similar to the pit? Or is it?
Yeah.
I think it probably is.
Mm.
Okay.
All right. Verse 10. And he said, he being Cain, of course.
No.
Or no, excuse me.
He
He
being
being,
God.
God. Excuse me. Pardon me.
That's a capital E.
Yeah. God said. He said, what have you done? Notice at this point, God already knows what he's done. So the first thing he does is, where's Abel? Which is parallel to God asking Adam, where are you? And then you notice the second thing God confronts Adam with is, have you done what I told you not to do? Notice the second question he asked of Cain. What have you done? And to let Cain know that he knows what he's done, the voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground.
The manner in which God questions is designed to provide you an opportunity to confess.
Absolutely. And this is the reason I'm taking you through this parallel, because even though God had to confront Adam a couple of times, and Adam tried to first beg off by pointing at his wife that she did it. Oh, and the fact that she did it is your fault, God. But finally then, does Adam, after God confronts him a couple of times, does Adam eventually confess to what he did? Yes, he does. That's why God forgave Adam, because Adam did confess. But now, notice, is there anywhere in here that Cain ever owns up to it? It says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the grave. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And he continues on. When you cultivate the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear. Behold, you have driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from thy face I shall be hidden, and I shall be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. And it will come about that whoever finds me will kill me. So the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, lest anyone finding him should slay him. Now let's stop there. Notice in all this, does Cain ever confess?
No.
No. The only thing he does is whine about the punishment that he's been given. Never confesses. Now, there are those that have said or theorized that, well, Cain was sorry for what he did, but, Cain's sorry he got caught.
Yeah.
Because Cain never confessed the sin.
Never showed any remorse.
Never any remorse. All he did is whine about the punishment that he got.
And he got off lightly. Because an eye for an eye would have meant that he should have been killed.
Right there on the spot. But notice, the punishment God gave Adam was that you're going to have to till the ground the hard way from now on. Notice the punishment he gives Cain. He says you can till the ground. Because also, what was Cain's occupation?
Farmer.
He was a farmer like his dad. Now God's telling him, from now on, when you attempt to farm, it's going to produce nothing. Cain has now essentially been fired from his occupation by God himself. Said the ground will no longer yield fruit to you. You are going to get nothing. And in fact, you're going to just wander from place to place. Why do you think that Cain would have to wander, other than the fact God said so?
Looking for fertile ground.
Well, that, and maybe looking to see what he could find growing, free of itself that he could eat. Because he can no longer till the ground, because if he does, it's a waste of time. God told him, ground's not going to produce anything for you from this point on.
He's a nomad, basically. I mean,
Yeah. Cain has now become the first nomad.
Yeah.
And he says, well, my punishment just too tough. You've driven me from this day from, and also, notice it's not only from the face of the ground, but from your face I shall be hidden. What does that tell us? Remember, we just talked about what is the definition of the second death.
Separation from God.
Separation from God. Cain himself has now declared that I will be separated from you. Does this sound like the voice of somebody who's repented? No. Cain was mad with his brother and mad with God, and his anger is such that he is not repentant, which means even though God spoke to him and he knew what was right, he has chosen to be a rebel. Yep, pride got the best of him. So, don't think that come the resurrection day, you're going to see Cain there with us saying, oh, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Nope. Cain's on the wrong side of the abyss.
He didn't even admit.
What's that?
He didn't even admit.
That was the whole point, is he never confessed. Never did.
Not even through infamous, saying that, where is my brother? He never admitted that his brother was dead.
Yeah.
He did not even question, where is my brother?
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't accuse anybody else or anything else because of his death. Unlike Adam, accused other people of the incident. So he, as evidence for a trial, if they had such a thing, there's nothing pointing any evidence whatsoever to him even killing him. The body's not there, the body's in the ground, the weapon's gone, the suspected perpetrator has never admitted it, hasn't indicated anything, even an alibi.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point there, though, is what do you think Cain did with Abel's body?
It's in the ground.
Buried it. 'Cause
Oh,
it
yeah.
said Jesus heard.
Blood.
Yeah,
blood
because
was
if the
coming
blood's
from
crying out from the ground, you got to think Cain probably tried to bury the evidence.
He's a farmer. Digging in the ground makes sense to him.
Good point. Now notice, and we'll finish up with this verse. We'll pick up on Wednesday with verse 16. It says, the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. Now, where else do we see this concept? Now, in this case, it says vengeance will be taken, and of course, this is God Himself speaking. So God is basically not condemning him to death, but sentencing him to life. And said, just in case anybody decides to overrule this, vengeance will be taken sevenfold against that person. Well, where have you seen this sevenfold concept before? Bonnie?
If you know the truth, if you know about God, and then you ignore it, you're gonna be punished 7 times greater.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if the Bible actually states that, but here, consider this. When Jesus told his disciples that they should forgive,
7 times 70.
there you go. Peter asked, should I forgive them 7 times? Guess where they got that concept from? Came right out of this. 7 times forgiving, and of course Jesus said, nope, 70 times 7. In other words, don't keep track. So that has its, basis in this. Now also, when it says that the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, you've heard people talk about, Cain's sign. Some people theorize that God actually put some sort of a tattoo, a mark, whatever, on Cain. Others say that God simply, gave Cain, just like, well, we were, some sort of a sign. You could interpret it both ways, but the most likely interpretation is that somehow God miraculously put some sort of a sign on Cain that marked him as being, a hands off. Don't mess with this guy. But now, we don't know, nowhere in the Bible are we ever told what this sign is. Nobody knows. At least not since then. But there is one other thing that it does point out to us, and we'll finish with that. Notice Cain is concerned that if I wander the earth and somebody comes across me, they'll kill me. Who's the they?
Brothers and sisters.
Because you figure by this point, even though it's apparent Abel does not have any kids. We know Abel doesn't how can we know for a fact Abel at this point did not have at least any sons, I should say?
They're not in the genealogy?
There's no genealogy for Abel, none. So it's apparent Abel did not have any kids and certainly not any sons at this particular point, because then Eve later, which we'll get to in the rest of the chapter, points out the fact that Seth was born as the new appointed child. So we get the impression that Abel at this point is, maybe he's still a bachelor, or whether he has a wife or not, he doesn't have any kids. But we can see that by this point, Adam and Eve have got a lot of other kids that have apparently been born, because we have no clue at this point in history how old Cain and Abel were. We know they were the firstborn, but the Bible does not tell us. We make the assumption this happened fairly quickly. Frankly, we don't know. It could have been years later.
Could have been hundreds of years.
Yeah, could have even been hundreds of years that before, Cain killed his brother Abel. We just don't know.
Well, it would have taken a while for there to be very many whoever's.
Exactly. So if she gave birth at least every year or two, even if you say had been 30 years later, there could have been a whole lot of brothers and sisters by this point. And Cain recognizes that if any of my other relatives come across me, they'll recognize who I am and they'll take vengeance on me. So this just tells us at this point, doesn't tell us who, but it does say that Adam and Eve were already by this point having a whole lot of other kids.
What's also interesting to
Mom
me,
and Dad.
What's that?
I said not to mention Mom and Dad.
Yeah.
Watch himself even with Mom and Dad, especially Mom.
What's that?
what's interesting to me is God makes this proclamation directly to Cain that, anyone who kills you will be, vengeance sevenfold. But that had to have been disseminated to everyone else as well for them to know that.
Mm-hmm.
So he must have sent out angels and messengers to give that message to all of the whoever's who might have been the ones looking to kill him.
There you go, because you figure that in order for anybody to make sense of what that sign was, God had to have shared that information with somebody else. It's like if you see somebody with a sign, you better leave them alone.
Would the mark have done that though?
What's that?
Would the mark have
Well,
done
what would anybody else known the mark meant without having been
You
told,
don't know,
having an explanation given to them?
that? Yeah, you don't know.
So God must have sent his messengers to give that information to however many whoever's there were at this point.
Unless it was a spiritual protection.
Bonnie?
Does the Bible say that Cain had descendants?
Oh, yes,
that's
we'll
coming up
get to
real
that. On Wednesday, we'll actually start covering, the descendants of Cain.
Yeah.
That's why I say the Bible at this point tells us Abel had no descendants, but Cain, yes, he had a lot of them. All right.